Hi, this is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer of Community Culture Showcase. Well, welcome to fall, and it certainly feels warm outside, but it is definitely the beginning of fall. And with fall comes concert series, and we'll be seeing a lot of concerts all over the area. So I have with me a guest for a quite unusual kind of orchestra, all comprised of flutes. And we're also going to see a variety of flutes that you can't imagine that are actually what you consider to be flutes. So my guest is the very talented Helene Rosenblatt, who is the, would you say, president, conductor?
I'd say project manager.
Project manager of the Connecticut Flute Orchestra. So welcome, Helene. I'm glad to have you on my show. So talk to us a little bit about a flute orchestra, because I'm sure most of my viewers had no idea.
So there actually is a number of flute orchestras in the United States, and the National Flute Association in their annual meeting has been running flute orchestras and or choirs, you can debate the term, for probably 15 years or so. I started thinking about a flute orchestra a little while ago and said, you know, we have enough wonderful professional level players in Connecticut that we could do our own, and I kind of want to pattern it after the LA Flute Orchestra, which is really, really well known in California and does a fair amount of concerts. And so I mentioned to a few of my colleagues that what about us starting a flute orchestra that we have a goal of charity and also of getting the best players in Connecticut involved so that we can present a concert just a couple of times a year. We have just a couple of rehearsals and we'll present fine flute music in an orchestral setting to an audience. So that was last August. And here we are in September 17th. We are having our first concert. A flute orchestra consists of different types of flutes, varying from piccolo all the way to contra, and I actually have a sub-contra, which may be at the concert, depending on what good shape it's in. And so it makes up a range similar to, say, a violin, viola, cello, and bass. The ranges a little bit overlap, and in between we have a couple of things that are probably a little bit more unfamiliar. I'll pick up one here. This is an E-flat flute, which is in the middle between piccolo and C flute. There aren't many of these around. They're very hard to get, and they're sort of hard to play to because they're kind of tough on intonation. But we actually have two in our flute orchestra.
Wow.
And we're going to demonstrate them in one of the pieces that we're playing.
So our flutes are considered woodwinds, am I correct?
That's correct.
Even though they don't obviously are made out of wood, they're made out of always metal.
Not really.
Oh, yes, the little piccolo is made out of wood.
This is wood. And,
yes.
And then for a while, Emmanuel Pahoud is a well-known flutist, European now, but he was playing in American orchestras, was playing on a wood flute and likes to play on a wood flute, and so started a trend where lots of people were playing on wood flutes. And so you will see wood flutes around.
Okay.
And historically, wood flutes have been around for many, 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 many years.
Is that where the term woodwind comes from in terms of using it? So tell us a little bit about how you got interested yourself in playing the flute.
Oh, well, I started when I was just going into 4th grade, and they had a summer music program, and my parents could afford to rent a flute, and that's what I started with. So I've been playing for quite a long time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you played when you were in school, in high school and college?
I played all the way through high school, college. I was a music major in undergrad, and I have a performance degree, master's degree in performance from Boston University. And then I played freelance in the Boston area for quite a while. I actually was on the sub list of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and I played with the Opera Company in Boston. And then I kind of managed to fall on my face. Unfortunately, rather literally, and didn't play for a while. But I came back to playing in 1996. And I've been playing with a lot of different groups within Connecticut for quite a while. Once I came back to playing, I started my own group, Blackledegmusic, Inc., which for the Connecticut Flute Orchestra is acting as their sponsor for this concert. So Blackledegmusic is a 501c, which allows Connecticut Flute Orchestra to come under its umbrella for right now, and therefore is tax deductible.
in terms of donations.
Donations.
Yes,
So,
definitely.
Hopefully, eventually, we would like to put the Connecticut Flute Orchestra actually under a college.
Oh, okay.
That's the ultimate goal.
Right.
We have 15 players on this concert. We have 22 on my staff roster list, and right now 3 subs, and a list of potential subs.
Right.
And that's giving you an idea of how many professional level flute players there actually are in Connecticut.
Right.
Who all want to play.
Yeah, exactly. They're looking for opportunities to be able to play. Would you call this thing something like this is not quite like chamber music, so?
No, it's actually on, one of the reasons we used the word orchestra was to indicate kind of the size. So 15 is pretty large in terms of flute ensembles. Blackledgemusic actually has a Blackledge flutes group that's been going on for quite some time. We usually only use 4. We use a quartet.
Right.
So once you expand past about 9, you're really not in chamber music anymore.
Okay.
You're really in an orchestral setting.
Right.
And the scoring for this concert and these pieces is very much and very similar to an orchestral scoring, similar to what you would use in a chamber orchestra. In fact, one of the pieces is Othello it's the ballet music by Giuseppe Verdi in an arrangement by a flute player.
Oh, okay.
For a flute orchestra.
Ah, okay.
And so you will even hear, if you come to the concert, you're going to hear the contrabass, which is this big guy over here, playing a drum part.
Interesting.
Bum, 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 which if you look on YouTube and you look up Othello, you'll see a full orchestra playing exactly this piece in a full orchestral arrangement. And this will be a flute orchestra arrangement.
And on September 17th at 6 p.m., you're playing at Wesleyan University.
Right, Crowell Concert Hall, which is the major hall at Wesleyan University. And thanks to them, we also, they're giving us the facility and allowing us to play there. We are also adopting their conductor. Nadia Potakema will be conducting us, and we are so happy to have her. She's an adjunct professor in the music department.
Is she also a flautist, as they would?
No, actually, she's a violist.
But
she had her break into the flute world. Wesleyan University ran a flute fest this past year. We actually had 45 flute players on the stage, and she was conducting. So it was quite interesting.
Yes, yes. Wesleyan has a famous music program?
They do. They are mostly known for their world music.
Okay.
They have a gamelan orchestra. They have a lot of interesting musics there. So we kind of fit, since this is somewhat different.
Right, exactly. So my daughter started out playing the cello. That's the only actual orchestral instrument she ever played. And she went through pre-college with the Hart School of Music. And they have a big orchestra program that took her to Sydney, Australia, and competitions in Chicago. I mean, so getting interested in music at a young age is absolutely important.
Crucially important.
Absolutely, because who's going to come to your concerts if young children don't know and learn to appreciate music?
And not just that, but what they learn from music. I had many, many students in the course of my career. I taught at South Shore Conservatory in Hingham, Mass. for a number of years, and I actually had around 60 private students at one point. It's not just making them into flute players, because that's not really the goal. It's nice if it happens and they can always play, but you also teach them a whole lot about life, about problems, how do you break things into pieces, about getting along with people, because you're sitting in groups all of the time and you have to adjust to each other. So music is not just because you're going to train somebody to be a professional.
Right.
In fact, I have the standard speech that I got, which was, you probably really don't want to be a professional.
Right.
Because this is what it entails. And being a professional musician is not only hard work, it's long and demanding and usually doesn't pay very well.
Right, exactly.
However, most of us who started on that route, who still play, would do it all over again.
Yes.
And I can tell you, so I made my living as a non-musician for many years after busting my mouth up. But the experience and what I learned as a musician made me a much better computer scientist than I would have been had I not had that training.
beside the fact that I always think that just learning how to read music helps you do like math, you learn fractions, and all that kind of stuff kind of stays with you, and you learn it in a completely different environment, and it sticks with you, and you can then apply it to elsewhere.
And it's usually fun, too.
Yeah, and it takes patience, which is something, a virtue that most of us don't really have.
And I can tell you a little story about that. So I just had a fairly young student for the summer who had come out of a public school music program and was taking his first private lessons. And that's usually a kind of a shocker to kids, especially these days, because they're not used to somebody sitting saying, okay, play me a scale. Oh, you don't know, here's how you do a scale, here how is it made of, and having to really think about it. That seems to be a process that doesn't get a whole lot of attention early these days.
Right.
And also I could tell immediately who had trouble reading, who has trouble with math. Because when you start explaining note values, if they're having trouble in math, it comes out right away when you're talking about note values. And sometimes you can help them through that and makes their math much better.
Much better, absolutely.
Also reading, and reading is something I used to notice even back 35, 40 years ago. I could pick the kids out who had trouble reading very quickly. And they were trying to read note, by letter. And I would be, okay, take a look at the pattern. And we learn scales, but you learn them as a pattern. Then you don't have to read note by note by note. That carries, at least for me as well, into reading. I don't read like this. I kind of look at the whole line.
Right.
And that's something, that's an acquired skill.
No, music is absolutely, it should be in the curriculum of every school in America. It is in many schools in other parts of the world where kids are required to learn music. I mean, I go back to my own public school education just like yours a while back, and in the New York City public schools at the time, you had to learn music, you had to do something. So I learned how to play the clarinet. I was an atrocious player, but they made me, and of course as you do it, you get better. You learn to play by yourself to get the pieces done, and then of course you're in, for me anyway, we were in a orchestra, so you had to learn the whole group idea. You had to listen to the conductor. And when I was going to school, this is aging most of everybody else, girls didn't play in the band, although a clarinet is a great band instrument. Girls didn't play in the band, so we just were stuck being in the orchestra.
So I finally got to the years when we could play in the band, but we weren't allowed in the jazz band.
Oh.
And so I could tell funny stories, because now that we've done reunions, I went to sit in with the boys, because we did a reunion, and I went to West Babylon for part of my schooling, and in Smithtown, New York. And we had, our instructors were some pretty well-known jazz people, and they turned out some pretty well-known jazz people. But I went and sat and played in with a dance band made up of New York freelancers and a professor from Michigan, and I could sit and play flute with them. Now, finally, after 40 some odd years.
That's it. So we have evolved, perhaps.
We've come a long way.
Yes, in the music world, absolutely, absolutely.
And women as well, because I played in the Women's Symphony in Massachusetts. There was one, briefly, for 2 years. And that was still at a time when women in major orchestras were very rare.
Right. Right.
Very rare.
Absolutely.
That's not true today. So yes, there's been many strides.
Yeah, that's true. As composers as well as conductors. Although, yes.
Yeah, composers are still lagging a little behind, but actually, there are three on this program. Phyllis Lukey, Catherine McMichael, Alexandra Molnar Suhaja. So on this program, plus a couple of arrangements that are women, I actually have a fair number of women. You'll find in a lot of the flute orchestra, flute choir music that there are a lot of women arrangers represented, because it's become kind of a woman's instrument, which I want to dispel that too. All my teachers were men. Right. And in those years, all the principal players of most orchestras were men, and still are to this day. So it's not a woman's instrument, it's anybody's instrument. It's just an instrument.
Right. Is the attraction that it's that? I mean, I picked the clarinet because it was small and easy to carry around. I mean, I'm sure kids when they start out do.
Oh yeah, it's shiny and it's small and I don't have to carry much.
Right.
Well, let me
Except
tell
for
you,
this one.
I'm not carrying a lot.
Now, do you want to just give us a little demonstration? This is going to be based on the stuff that you're going to play at Wesleyan?
Yeah, these are little snippets of excerpts from the pieces that I'm playing on the program. And I'm going to start off with my little piccolo here.
Okay,
So this is a piccolo in C, and just to let people know, there are piccolos in other keys. Piccolo in C is what is usually used in major orchestras these days. But there was a period that piccolo in D flat was the rage. So
music
just
trends
like everything else.
Right, in and out of trends.
You got trends. So this is a little bit of As Eagles Flew. Now, just to show you a little bit of difference between this, I'm going to pick up a mid-range flute, which used to be considered to be one of the low flutes, but now it's mid-range. This is an alto flute, and you'll notice it's a straight head. When you get to the concert, you may see a bunch that look kind of like this, but they're smaller. Those are curved head altos. And again, times have changed. Mm-hmm. It's much easier to play a curved head alto because your hands end up kind of more like this. I happen to like...
You stretch your arms.
You stretch your arms out. It
yes.
gets tiring.
Yes.
I happen to love this alto, so it's not going anywhere. As you can hear, alto is a mellow kind of tone. It's also keyed in G, which means that the transposition is kind of odd compared to most of the other instruments.
So the difference between the two of them, the size is so dramatic. Does the size then impact? This is a much higher pitched sound than the alto. The alto, I think of like an alto sax in terms of the...
Yeah, and the range is actually, alto sax is not a bad comparison on the top range of that instrument. Also, the fact that it's keyed in G makes the timbre, which is the quality of the sound, different.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is, to my ear, and again, I was a terrible musician, but that's a very nice, mellow sound from the larger one versus the smaller one. Is it a lot of different fingering? Because obviously you're going to put your mouth in a different...
No, actually the fingerings on almost all of them are, I'm going to say, almost the same. There are a few differences, and then you'll see on this guy, this is a Kingma bass that has some extra keys on it. We're evolving as we play microtonal music, as we play all these crazy new stuff. We have an open hole Kingma system bass, very unusual, but getting less so as we go along.
So when you pick out the scores that you want to play for this concert, or any concert, you take in the fact that people are going to be playing a variety of different flutes
Absolutely.
At the concert for a variety of different sounds.
Correct. Actually, since it is an orchestra, what you're going to see on stage, I'm playing a sample of each of these pieces, but on the concert, I'm actually mostly playing contra. You're going to see 14 other players playing a mix of all of these instruments. Some of the people will stay on piccolo and not change in between, but others will be changing between piccolo and C flute. or C flute and alto flute, or alto and bass flute, and in some cases subcontra, bass flute or alto flute.
Yeah, because when you go to an
cases.
orchestra, you don't, at least I don't get the impression, of course, you're looking at, say, a 60, 70-piece orchestra, that it looks like they're all playing, except with piccolo, and then one different kind of flute. But you're suggesting that, in fact, these players could be playing 2 or 3
In fact, the more versatile they are, the easier it is for me to program, and because for some of the instrumentation changes, if you come and you want to hear us play, and hopefully you'll all come, we're going to be doing a suite from, I'm going to put it out here, Pink Panther Suite.
Oh,
and
yeah, yes.
halfway in the middle, the instrumentation changes because it was actually done at 2 different times. So there's a suite 1 and a suite 2. So part of the way through, some poor person who's playing alto on one movement is now moving to playing C flute on the next movement, hopefully staying in the same place. That is one of my goals. But you will see a lot of that. And in general, for the orchestra, we keep like instruments together. So the bass flutes will sit together, the alto flutes, pretty much like cello and viola. And then you get C flutes with piccolo are kind of a combination of the violin section.
One of the things that's interesting to me, since my daughter was a cellist, there is not, that's it, that's all she played, cello, or she could have played electric cello, which is a very different sound. But that's about all there is. I, as a clarinetist, know the same thing as what you're talking about being a flautist. There are many different kinds of clarinets, and as you suggest, a versatile player would be someone who would play in the course of maybe not one concert, but in the course of being in an orchestra, 3 or 4 or 5 different kinds of clarinets.
Oh, and it's not unusual, especially in contemporary music, for clarinetists to go between B-flat clarinet, A clarinet, bass clarinet, sometimes alto clarinet, and show players play a mix of everything.
Right. But that you don't see that in strings. You see that in these kinds of instruments.
And strings, because the orchestra sound, the string sound tends to blend better. Actually, making flutes blend better was part of the reason for adding flutes like this big flute. And there's a maker who made them out of PVC, and I have a PVC one that's bigger than this. The reason he did that was because hearing that high sound all the time is hard to take, but you add some bottom into it, like a cello sound. And in some places, they used to hire bass players to come in. Well, we don't hire bass players anymore. We play these things.
Right. So is this particular one, is this a new development in terms of the evolution of the flute itself?
The contrabasses and subcontrabasses have been around since, it's pretty new, around 1960s.
That's very new.
They started being produced, and now they're a rage.
Right.
They were at the National Flute Convention, which just happened in August. There must have been 20 of them.
I mean, because the flute's in the Bible. That's
yes,
that whole idea.
Yes, the flute is one of the oldest instruments. But yeah, this is a fairly new development. Although there were different sizes all along, but getting this kind of size and to make it really play is a relatively recent development, mainly because the technology is better. But there are earlier ones that came in this size. So bass flutes have been around for pretty good amount of time, although you used to not see them. You would hardly ever see one in Connecticut. I think I had one of the first ones, and somebody rented one occasionally around town. But I actually owned one fairly early, and I owned one that was actually built in the 1960s.
And the attraction for you as a player is what?
Oh, I like to change flutes.
Okay.
It's fun. It's something a little bit different. And also, I get tired of that high sound myself sometimes and want to hear. Alto flute is used a lot in jazz, by the way, and has been by jazz saxophone players. Probably before they were being played by real flutists. Right. Because they loved the tone quality of the alto.
It's a nice sound. Absolutely.
And that was picked up. And for a long time, the alto flute was kind of the lowest flute you would see in any orchestra ever. And you wouldn't see them very often. Now, they're starting to actually orchestrate for bass flutes in modern orchestra pieces.
Okay.
Not many, but they are
Right.
starting to do it.
And what makes it easier to do it? Is the technology of bending the metal?
Yeah, the technology's gotten better. Intonation's gotten better because they know where they can use technology to place where the holes are
Okay.
and also make their keys. So you'll see it. The keys are moved a little bit so that your poor hands can hit the keys.
Okay.
If they had to make the keys the right size, you would have trouble hitting the keys.
So do you have to learn as the player? Do you have to learn a whole different technique as you go from one flute to another?
It's not really different technique, but they do blow somewhat differently, and just like
The clarinet,
just
yes.
like the size, changing size, like to an E flat clarinet, changing size from piccolo to E flat is not so bad because they're changing from piccolo to flute. You get used to because you do it a lot. Changing from contrabass
Right.
to piccolo
Yes,
within minutes, tough.
yes. Do you actually have to do that
I
often?
try not to, to do that. That's why I'm not playing any piccolo on this concert, because I'm playing so much bass. To go from bass to piccolo without a little bit of warming it up and getting centered on the whole would be tough.
Right, right.
But I am going from contra to the E flat, which is also not all that easy, which is why I'm letting somebody else play the solo.
Do you, is there certain things like with clarinet player, you have to have a really good mouth because it's a reed instrument. Is there certain, makes for a better flautist? I mean, in terms of your mouth?
There are some people who could play flute better than others without a lot of work because of the structure of their mouth. If you are considerably undershot, that makes it hard to play flute. I would probably suggest, if somebody was just starting, to go to clarinet or oboe. But you can get so somebody can play well. And you will see people with not such a centered embouchure. I'll take my C flute. I play pretty centered. But some people will play over here or over here, and that's just a factor of where the hole, the opening for the air, ends up being from their muscles on their face.
And do you get like an achy feeling in your mouth from playing after?
Not after playing the number of years I have been.
Okay, okay.
I can tell you the first time I played actually the subcontra, which is bigger than this, was the first time in my life I had hyperventilated because that big flute just takes an enormous amount of air.
Right. Now, what makes that a flute versus? Oh my God! What else could you call it? I mean, this.
Oh, it is a flute because of the way you blow across the mouthpiece.
Okay, so that's the characteristic.
Flute, you blow across a sharp edge. That's also true of recorder. A recorder is considered a flute, and I play recorder as well, but it's a fipple flute, whereas this is a transverse flute.
And the difference is about where the mouth is?
Mouthpiece cut.
Okay.
Okay, on a recorder, it's called a fipple because the sharp edge is actually in the beak of the mouthpiece. On a transverse flute, you lose all the air. Half the air gets split above. The air that's making the sound hits that sharp edge on the opposite side of the flute. And that's how you actually produce the sound.
Try to play that one again, a couple more. So I hear you breathing, and is there a certain way that you're taught that you take certain breaths, or is it by the?
It's by the phrasing.
Okay.
And my breathing is not as good as it should be these days.
Well.
But you're taught to try to make phrases where you don't interrupt, and where you have to take a breath in a hurry, you try to do it as soundlessly as you can, with as little time as you can. So one of the things I should show you.
Yes.
Actually, let me play the E flat first so you can hear what this sounds like, because the timbre of this is much different, and it is in the key of E flat, which is pretty unusual. The other things that are in E flat are saxophones.
Yes.
Okay, that's it. Saxophone's in this. So
Right.
whenever I had to play with a saxophone player and I didn't want to have to actually transpose its sight, pick up the E flat. Here's an E flat. Now, a little
Yes.
story about E-flats. They're hard to find, and they were around all the time in about the 1950s. They were used by school systems to start kids on flute because they couldn't reach the
Right.
C flute. So they bought some E-flats. Unfortunately, the sound quality and the transposition made it kind of hard, and they end up at the back of the closet in most schools. These days, people will kill to get them because they want to be able to play them in flute groups. And they are, in general, not being produced. Every once in a while, somebody will make one or two of one of the major manufacturers. This particular one I actually bought off a flute maker, but it's an old Artley, which might be a familiar name to some people who played flute a long time ago. It's a school flute,
Interesting, interesting.
but they're really hard to get these days. Now, that's what an E-flat sounds like. Now, to hear the other kind of flute that sort of sounds a bit different than the flute you're kind of used to hearing
Right.
is my bass.
Okay.
And a bass flute's in C, so it's in the same key as the C flute.
Right.
But it starts an octave lower.
Looks like a bassoon, only in metal.
Yeah, most people usually think it's plumbing, along with that one. Bass flutes have been getting much more popular, and you're going to start to see them a lot more often. They're another one where people kind of like the sound. I'm going to give you a little bit of a bass flute part here. Actually, I was going to also do Shades of Senate, I think. So this is a familiar tune. And just a little bit of some more.
So the deeper sound comes because it goes through that cylinder on the top.
Two things. It's longer in length
Yes.
than that flute.
Yes.
It's wider in bore
Okay.
than that flute.
Okay.
So you get
And the
both.
and the loop on the top.
The loop is made so that you can hold it. Because if
Oh.
you straighten this out the way this is straightened out,
Yeah,
you'd
yeah.
never
You'll
be
in
able
the
to
next
balance
room.
it.
Okay, I
and
got you.
And I got to tell you, this is a fairly light bass. My first bass has one less key on it, so it's actually a little bit lighter. And then I have one that was made in 1962 by Rudel Cart, and it's a tremendous bass. It's really good sound, but it weighs a ton. And if you were to hold it up for an hour, your
arms
arm
would fall
would
off.
hurt.
So one of the changes that has happened over the years is that the metals that they use for these instruments have gotten lighter.
Not the metals that they use, but the actual tubing has
Oh.
gotten thinner
Okay.
and lighter. So they can draw the tubing so that they can make a lighter instrument.
Is that true for all metal instruments, or is that just no?
And it depends. And bores, they've been playing around with the size of the bore as well, and the placement of the holes. And again, there's where technology is helping, so that they can determine both the size and the placement of the holes more accurately and get better pitch. They're also making some out of plastic these days
Really?
in order to get the weight down.
Okay. And how's the sound?
I'll take my metal one.
Okay. All right.
But they're getting better.
Now, would any of them be then made in wood, like the piccolo?
Not generally. I actually have seen a partially wood body on a bass. That's a relatively old bass, a bass from probably around the 1950s to early 60s.
Is it much heavier? Is that one of the?
I've seen a picture of it. That's
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
in general now, they're all made either out of metal or they're going towards various kinds of plastics for
And
the
what's the
bodies.
metal? What is it?
Silver plate over brass.
Okay.
This is gold. That's granadillo wood. This is solid silver head, plated body, and this is silver plated over everything. This is silver plate over brass.
Interesting. Interesting.
And then there's my PVC that I don't have here, which is bigger, and it literally is made out of plumbing tubing and brass keys.
Interesting. All right, you going to play for us this big sucker?
Yeah, here comes my contrabass, which
Now,
is also in
how do
C.
you move that around? Does it come apart?
It comes in 5 pieces, thank
Okay,
goodness.
okay.
I got to tell you, the plastic one comes in 5 pieces, but most of it is in 1 piece.
Oh, okay.
And this huge case, and after I bought that in 2001, and just last year I got this, the Contra, because it's a real instrument. It's actually made by a woman in the Netherlands, Eva Kingma. She makes this bass too.
Oh,
I met her at National Flute Association convention in Washington, D.C., and got to talk to her and tried her Contra. She had started making Contras not long before, and I ordered one.
Interesting. Okay, let's hear this baby.
Here's my Contra bass. As you can hear, it's like a string bass.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
And here's a little bit of some more Mancini. It's like playing a string bass, really.
Well, but except that you don't have to breathe. You just have to go like this.
Yes, and I did a duet with a string bass player last year, just to kind of...
Because the bass is probably as tall as that is.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yes.
But I can tell you, he can play a lot louder. He could dominate me. But we're getting there. It has been suggested, and I've seen other instruments actually mic'd to bring up the volume. It depends on the space. And my PVC bass actually has a setup for a microphone in it.
Inside of it.
Inside
okay.
of it.
All right. So
But
when you start out, is you want to say you want to play the flute? What would you start with as a
C flute.
C flute?
Now, they do make the C flutes now with curved heads
Really?
for young players, and that's especially for very small kids around 7, 8. And there is now a Suzuki flute program for even 3-year-olds. I have some doubts about that, but yeah, these days they actually make a curved head so that it's closer. Again, you're not out here.
Ah, okay.
You'll see most poor little flute players don't have the strength
Yeah.
to hold their flutes up at the correct angle. So that's been a great boon.
Really?
For teaching, to be able to put a curved head on.
And it doesn't change the sound?
No, the tone quality is probably not as good.
Okay.
But for a beginner,
It doesn't matter.
it doesn't make a whole lot of difference.
Yes.
And then you can change to have the straight head later on.
Because originally you would start at 6, 7, 8 with the one in your hands.
Well, usually this is an open hole flute. Most of the time people start with a plateau system, which is the keys are closed.
Okay.
And actually many professional players will play with closed holes as well. The open holes are mainly for doing more contemporary extended techniques, and some people think it sounds better. I've played on both closed and open hole, and tone quality is more a function of the head than anything else, but in order to do extended techniques, you need the open hole.
Okay.
But plenty of players play on plateau system, closed hole, and most students start on plateau system would be like this, but in the key of C.
Okay.
So closed hole.
And the reason, is there a rationale for that?
C flute is what is scored for bands and orchestras most frequently.
Okay. Is there now, you're talking about these flute orchestras, is there now an interest by composers to compose?
Oh yes, about the last 8 or 9 years, there's been a burgeoning of composers writing for flute ensembles of varying signs. Flute choir, sometimes it's called a flute choir, sometimes it's called a flute ensemble, sometimes it's called a flute orchestra. They are pretty much synonymous in terms of their instrumentation. Generally, the flute orchestra will have more of a range, like I have the E flat. It's rare for that to be in most groups. Most flute groups have a preponderance of C flutes.
Okay.
And maybe an alto, maybe a bass. These days, it's getting much more popular. Obviously, there are many, many flute players out there. If we in Connecticut come up with, there were like 54 people in attendance at a flute fest several months ago in Middletown. And that wasn't like all the people who could have been there.
Right.
We're putting up 15 professional level players to play a variety of instruments, and they're limited to their choice of being a Connecticut resident. We had people from outside of Connecticut wanting to play, and we said,
no,
we've got plenty of our own folks who are qualified.
Right.
And I know there's many more people out in the woodwork that I haven't found their names yet, and we want to keep this group going. But we need to create opportunities for these flute players. We're turning out tremendous players out of the Hart School, out of, I went to Boston University, New England, I was accepted at New England Conservatory. Out of all of these schools are coming tremendous players who are trained so well. And you have doctoral students fighting for a place in a non-paid, non-professional orchestra.
Right.
So here's our opportunity. Let's put a bunch of really good flute players up on stage, and let's have some fun. And I look at this Connecticut Flute Orchestra as a win-win proposition, actually a win-win-win proposition. Great flute players, we can get together, play great music, and present it to an audience, something a little bit different, and music that you would probably only hear at a National Flute Convention, and hear well, by the way, at a flute convention. But we should play it for other audiences, not just for other flute players.
Right.
And proceeds of the ticket are going to help sponsor somebody who can't afford private lessons out of a public school.
Oh, very nice.
So,
very nice.
I'm really excited for this first concert.
Right.
And it really came out of the germ of idea of, there's all these great sessions we put together at National Flute Association, and I know there's tremendous numbers of flute orchestras in Florida and in California. And most other states, there's 2, I think, in Massachusetts. And what about Connecticut? Why aren't we doing it?
Right.
And we can do it better. At least we want to try.
Is it something that you have a card-carrying membership in? Is that how you even find these people?
The membership came from word of mouth, came from people.
Okay.
It was by invitation, and we were looking for a certain level of player.
Right.
We also don't want to denigrate any existing groups, and we're not trying to. A number of us play in all kinds of other groups.
Right.
This was to be something special. We're only going to do it a few times a year. Right. We're going to do it with limited rehearsals, but we're going to do it with the best people we can possibly get. But also who want to work together. So that's also one of the requirements. We need to get people who are willing to say, well, let the other person play the solo this time. It's a very cordial group of people.
A little sharing there,
Right,
the spotlight.
and it also takes the pressure off. You know, the first flute player in an orchestra has a tremendous amount of pressure on them. They're playing all the solos through an hour and a half or 2 hour program. Well, here we can spread it out. And we can also spread out the types of flutes. We're rotating in this concert people between alto and bass and C flute to give them a break off of one of the lower instruments. The lower instrument parts, although they're getting better because the composers are getting better, a lot of times can be a little bit boring. They're absolutely necessary though. But sometimes you don't want to leave that person on a concert for, you know, an hour and a half of playing just contra. You want to give them a chance to play a flute solo.
Right.
So we're doing that.
So it's going to be like a band. People are going to stand up and then just play their particular little piece.
No. It's not like a jazz band. It's much more like a concert orchestra
Okay.
performance. It is a concert orchestra
Right.
performance.
And you're playing in the big auditorium, so you've got lots of spaces
got-
for people to show up.
We've got lots of space for people to show up. There's 450 seats, I believe. And we'd like to fill them all.
Yes, yes, yes.
And it's going to be a really interesting concert. Just to give you a little bit, let me give you some titles here.
Yes, absolutely. Tell us
What the
the
program's going to
repertoire
be like.
is going to be.
And I can give you a little bit about some of the people. We're opening with a fanfare. It's called Fanfare 36, and it's by Kelly Vaya, who is a piccolo player out of Atlanta. I've met him. He's actually been up here in Connecticut before because we premiered with my Blackledge Flutes group a suite of his French Christmas carols that he had arranged. Great guy. He runs the National Flute Association high school flute choir, and I think he now does the college flute choir as well. So, and he also does composing and arranging.
Right.
And the fanfare is his own composition. We're doing a fugue by David Bailey, who is the conductor of one of the, I think it's the New Hampshire Flute Choir, and that has our E-flat flutes. And we have two of them, so we're going to show off
Wow.
two
Right.
E-flat flutes.
Tell the kids to go through the closets and find out if there's some spare
Well, in their
instruments.
schools, whether they have any, they can make some money because people are looking for them. We're going to play the Verdi Othello ballet music, which is arranged by Charles Benmier, who is also a flute player and composer, now living in Florida, and he has arranged many, many full orchestra pieces for flute ensemble.
Do you think that it takes an actual player to be able to compose music for an instrument like this?
No.
No?
Any composer can do it. They'd have to do their research, and it wouldn't hurt to talk to flute players, but they don't have to be a flute player.
But is it the ordinary that they would be? Is it more the norm that they would be someone?
Well, they are because of the way this has come about. So flute orchestras have kind of come about through the national flute conventions, and also there used to be flute bands, and they probably still are. England was very, very big on flute bands, the way Connecticut is on drum and fife and drum corps. Well, England has flute bands, and they have sizes that I don't have here.
Wow.
And they have for years. James Galway came out of the flute bands.
Okay. Okay. For
tradition.
anybody who doesn't know, he's probably one of
He's
the most
famous flute players these days, anyway. And so that tradition has been around for some time. It's beginning to blossom in the United States because there are so many fine young flutists and older folks too, that have been around a while that just want to play and want to keep playing, but we want to play at a higher level. I don't want to disparage my colleagues, but many times the flute section is the best section in a lot of these local amateur groups.
Okay, the community bands and community orchestras.
And they kind of want a place to play that the level is a little bit higher. And this is intended to give it the opportunity to do that.
This is the equity version of an orchestra.
That's right, instead of the community playhouse.
Right.
We need the community playhouses, and some of them are excellent.
Yes, and it's a good...
Not to disparage them, they go all year round. This is not what this is intended to be.
Right.
In fact, this is intended to be a boost for those. It's like, do this, and maybe at some point you might, get to play in the Connecticut Flute Orchestra. Other pieces on the program, Melodια the Neumes by Stephen Lias, who is not a flute player. And it's a full-length work, very interesting. And The Lone Arranger by Philip Boutel, which is an interesting piece. It has come and you'll hear little pieces of other pieces within this work.
Oh,
but
okay.
it starts out sounding like The Lone Arranger.
Oh, okay.
Okay, The Long Ranger. And then it dissolves into some other pieces and kind of ends back with dum da 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 da. But very cute. And Catherine McMichael, who I mentioned, flute players love. She's not a flute player.
Oh.
She has written many, many works for flute, but she's not a flute player. Her Silver Celebration is what we're going to play, and it was written for an NFA convention. And then Talisman, which is a relatively new piece by Alexandra Molnar Suhadja. She has started to come into her own as a composer, I think in the last 3 or 4 years, and has been featured in a number of National Flute Association works that have received prizes. And then we're going to end with the full Pink Panther suite because it's fun.
So you chose the program.
I chose this program. Hopefully our next one will be by committee.
Okay, and you picked these pieces, why?
Actually, I went and listened to them. I picked some of them in order to highlight the instrumentation. I picked some of them because they won awards, and I wanted to feature them on the program.
Oh, okay.
I picked some of them because I know they're the composers, and I knew their work was good.
Interesting.
So there's a mix.
Yeah, okay. So how would someone who's not a flute player sit down and compose a piece for flutes?
Well, they may have a melody and tunes in
they
their head to begin with.
And
then it's a matter of what is the instrumentation capable of. And that's easy enough to look up online.
Okay.
And you can listen to samples just like I was listening. Love YouTube. I mean, it's one of the best inventions for musicians there is. When I was a kid, I'd have to go to a library and try to take probably a scratchy record out.
Right.
If I could get a hold of one. Now you can go on and listen to everything. So these young composers, they can listen to all kinds of things and all kinds of performances. It's getting easier to write for instrumentation that you may not have familiarity with. So,
but something obviously tickles their fancy about a flute.
Well, there's lots of flute players. Here's we come back to, look at all the flute players in various bands and schools.
Right.
There's lots of them.
So what happens? They need to play.
Give them something to play.
Yes, I see.
I play in a band. I actually play oboe in a band. They're pretty close to 20 flute players in that band now. I'm one of 2 oboists. And the levels in community bands vary all over the place, but a lot of those flute players are very fine, very well-trained flute players.
And they just don't have opportunities
and
to
that's
play.
Their opportunity. There's nothing wrong with it.
Right.
But, be nice to give them some more opportunities.
Right.
And for players like in the Hartford Symphony, because they're on our roster, although they're not playing this concert, it's another opportunity for them, particularly as we try to go as professional as possible.
Right.
Quite honestly, we want this to be a paid organization at some point. All right?
Right.
Because that's the level we're looking for. And the good thing is we have that level in this state. The bad thing is we don't have enough opportunities for them.
Right.
And a lot of the orchestras are getting cut. Witness our Hartford Symphony Orchestra. We need to find more opportunities for them. And if the administration in Hartford won't help find them opportunities, then it behooves some of the rest of us to go ahead and do that as well.
Wow. Well, we're talking about a starving musician. So my daughter, the cellist, actually gave it up. She applied to the finest music schools in the country, and when they didn't accept her for the music program, they said she could come to the university and then just audition for the orchestra. She decided, and she hasn't played since she graduated from high school. But at the same time, she got all that wonderful education there. But my mother used to say, God rest her soul, because she's now passed away. She would say, what do you want a starving musician for? So she became a doctor. And she became a doctor, I think, because she learned skills from being a musician that were able to be transferred into studying well enough and to
And she
getting
can always
into,
go back and play in a community orchestra.
well, we gave her back the cello, her best cello. We used to have 3 of them in the house at one time. We gave her back the best one, and she actually said when she gets a little time, she'll actually go maybe take a lesson or 2 to.
Right,
and
and
she's
go
got to
back
get
to
those
a
callous
community
fingers
orchestra.
back. Exactly.
Because and you can always do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. You can also start an instrument later in life.
Oh yes, yes.
Okay, I didn't play oboe until pretty recently, and I played recorder and put it down, and now I'm playing in a recorder ensemble as well. And I used to play in doctors' orchestra in New York. There were plenty of doctors who kept music up. You know what their schedule was like. They couldn't do it. Most of them couldn't do it through all of their schooling and afterwards. But at some point, they came back and they're playing in the doctor's orchestra. And as a young kid, I was sitting in the flute section, playing with some really pretty phenomenal doctor violinists, cellists, and violists. And we actually had some really good fine soloists on that orchestra. So you can always do music.
Yes, and you should always try and do music. It's just good for you.
It's good for your brain. They've done studies. I don't know how many times they publish the studies, and I keep going, I could have told you that.
Yes, exactly.
It just keeps your brain so much more alive. And I can tell you, having gone to oboe now, and the fingerings there are some similar, but there's a lot of differences.
Right.
Boy, does it keep your brain like having to think.
Exactly. So I want to thank Helene Rosenblatt for coming here today.
Thank you.
Now, we want everybody to get out there September 17th. Here it is.
6 p.m.
6 p.m. at Wesleyan University. So it's in Middletown, easy to get to, right off of Major Road. Go there Sunday afternoon.
Plenty
early
of parking
evening.
there.
Exactly. There's some nice places to eat dinner, and go ahead and enjoy this flute orchestra, and then come back and do more of it. You can get in touch with Helene if you unfortunately can't make this orchestra performance, and try and make another one. So we have some email addresses for you to contact Helene and her group, so you can find out about other ones. And September 17th must be a very popular day, because I just wanted to let my audience know that in my other persona as Anastasia Goodman, the mystery writer, I'm having a reading. It's the Battle of Stalingrad, according to Sasha Perloff, who is my fictional New York City police detective born in Russia. And we will talk about the Battle of Stalingrad, the real battle, and also I will read passages, because my books are full of these stories of survivors of the Battle of Stalingrad, which my character, because in fact Russian people in general think it was the turning point of World War II, and their great sacrifices are the ones that saved the world from the Nazis. So it'll be an interesting discussion. Come on down. It's at the Babcock Smith House, which is a historical museum in Westerly, Rhode Island. Remember, September 17th, that's a very great day. You can come to mine, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Stay an hour, learn about the Battle of Stalingrad, get to know my character, Sasha Perloff, then hop in your car and go to Wesleyan and get your ears full of the music of the flute. It's like being immersed in passages from the Bible. It just reads like that. So enjoy the flutes, enjoy Sasha Perloff, keep that date in mind, September 17th. We got a whirl of events, and this is just the start of the fall. Fall season means all kinds of things, music, theater, art, everything happening. We hope to have it on our show. So I thank you. This is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer of Community Culture Showcase. Remember September 17th, and keep us in mind. Good night.